When I remarried at 63, I didn't tell my husband or his 3 sons that the 8 luxury condominiums along the Vancouver waterfront were mine. And that decision saved everything I'd spent 4 decades building. Let me start from the beginning, because the story of how I got here matters. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 63 years old now. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in East Vancouver, the daughter of a seamstress and a shipyard worker. Money was always tight. I watched my mother mend the same dress 3 times rather than buy a new one. I learned early that financial security wasn't something you were given. It was something you built, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. I started working at 16, weekends at a real estate office, filing papers and answering phones. That's where I fell in love with property. Not the glamorous part, the selling and the commissions, but the foundation of it. The idea that land, that buildings, that physical space held value that could grow, that could provide security. I went to night school, studied business and finance while working full-time. At 24, I bought my first property, a rundown studio apartment in East Van. I lived in half of it and rented out the other half. I worked 3 jobs that year: receptionist during the day, bookkeeper in the evenings, and weekend shifts at a hotel front desk. I met my first husband, Thomas, when I was 26. He was a teacher, kind and steady. We had a good marriage, not passionate but solid. We built a life together. I kept acquiring properties, slowly, carefully. A duplex here, a small apartment building there. Thomas wasn't particularly interested in the business side. He trusted me to handle our finances, and I did. We were married for 31 years. Then, 3 years ago, Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack. He was 62, I was 60. The grief was overwhelming. Not just the loss of my husband, but the loss of my routine, my companion, the person who knew all my stories. I spent a year barely functioning. My daughter, who lives in Toronto with her own family, called every week worried about me. But eventually, I started to come back to life. I joined a book club. I started going to yoga classes. I traveled to Portugal with a friend. And slowly, I remembered who I was before the grief, the woman who'd built something from nothing. That's when I met Graham. It was at a charity fundraiser for the Vancouver Art Gallery about 2 years ago. I was 61, he was 64, recently widowed himself, only 8 months before. We started talking by the appetizer table, and 3 hours later, we were still talking, sitting on a bench outside because the event had ended. Graham was charming, warm. He had kind eyes and a gentle manner. He'd been a civil engineer, worked on bridge projects across Canada. He loved hiking, photography, classical music. He told me about his late wife, Susan, how they'd been married for 38 years, how he missed having someone to share morning coffee with. I told him about Thomas, about the loneliness of coming home to an empty house, about learning to cook for one. We started seeing each other. Dinners, walks along the seawall, weekends exploring Vancouver Island. It felt comfortable, safe. After 6 months, he asked if we could make it official, start calling ourselves a couple. I said yes. Graham lived in a modest townhouse in Burnaby. He told me he had a decent pension from his engineering career, that he and Susan had lived simply, saved carefully. He seemed financially stable, not wealthy, but comfortable. I lived in one of my waterfront condos, a 2-bedroom unit with views of the North Shore Mountains. Graham knew I owned the condo. What he didn't know was that I owned 7 others in the same building, plus the commercial unit on the ground floor that housed a boutique cafe. I'd built this portfolio over 35 years. Every property purchase was strategic. Every renovation was calculated. I'd weathered the 2008 financial crisis by refinancing at the right moment. I'd survived tenants who wouldn't pay, pipes that burst, roofs that needed replacing. The properties generated about $32,000 in rental income monthly after expenses, plus the appreciation over the years meant my net worth was somewhere around $12 million. But I didn't tell Graham any of this. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I'd learned something over the years. Money changes how people see you, and I wanted Graham to see me, Eleanor, not Eleanor, the property owner. not Eleanor with assets to manage or decisions to make about investments. When people asked what I did, I said I managed properties, which was true. I just didn't specify that I managed them because I owned them. After a year of dating, Graham proposed. We were at Lighthouse Park, watching the sunset over the water. It was simple, sweet. He said he didn't want to spend whatever years we had left alone. He wanted to build a life together, even if we were starting late. I said yes. We decided on a small wedding, just immediate family. My daughter flew in from Toronto. Graham's 3 sons came from different parts of the country. Michael, 38, was a financial analyst in Calgary. David, 35, was a corporate lawyer in Toronto. And Brandon, 32, was a real estate agent in Vancouver. I should have paid more attention to that last detail. The wedding was lovely. Simple ceremony at a small chapel in North Vancouver, dinner at a nice restaurant afterward. Graham's sons were polite, friendly. They welcomed me into the family, said they were happy their father had found someone. But almost immediately after the wedding, the questions started. It began with Brandon, the real estate agent. We were at a family brunch 2 weeks after the wedding. He asked, casually, "So, Eleanor, Dad mentioned you manage properties. How many buildings are in your portfolio?" I smiled. "Oh, it's a family operation. Small scale, nothing major. But how many units?" He pressed. "I'm always interested in investment property strategies. Are they residential or mixed use?" "A bit of both," I said vaguely. "Nothing too exciting." Graham interjected. "Eleanor's being modest. She's been in property management for decades. She's brilliant at it." Brandon's eyes lit up with interest. "Really? You know, I'd love to pick your brains sometime. Maybe we could collaborate on something. I'm always looking for investment opportunities, and with your experience and my sales network..." I deflected, changed the subject to his recent sales, asked about the market trends he was seeing. But I noticed something. The way his questions had shifted from casual interest to business proposition in under 5 minutes. The next encounter was with Michael, the financial analyst. He and his wife came to visit a month after the wedding. We were having dinner at my condo, the one Graham and I lived in together now. Michael stood at the window, looking out at the view. "This is a prime location. Units like this must be, 1.2, 1.3 million now?" "Around there," I said. "Do you own it outright, or is there still a mortgage?" I paused. Graham looked up from the table, surprised by the directness of the question. "Michael," Graham said, a hint of reproach in his voice. No, it's fine," Michael said quickly. "I'm just thinking from a financial planning perspective. You know, Dad, now that you're married, you and Eleanor should really think about estate planning, tax optimization, that sort of thing." "We have wills," Graham said simply. "But have you updated them? Have you considered a spousal trust? What about the tax implications of Eleanor's properties? If they're held individually versus in a corporation, the tax treatment is completely different." I smiled politely. "I have an accountant who handles all that. I'm sure they're competent," Michael continued, "but I specialize in high net worth estate planning. I could review everything, make sure you're optimized. No charge, of course. Family." "That's very kind," I said, "but everything's already structured appropriately." I saw the flash of frustration in his eyes before he covered it with a smile. The third son, David the lawyer, was more subtle. He waited 3 months before making his approach. He invited us to dinner at his hotel. He was in Vancouver for work, staying at the Fairmont. Over expensive wine and steak, he brought up his own financial situation. "You know, I'm thinking about buying investment property here in Vancouver," he said. "The Toronto market is so saturated, but I don't know the Vancouver market well enough. Eleanor, you've been doing this forever. What neighborhoods are best for rental yield?" I gave generic advice. East Van, parts of Surrey, New Westminster. "What about waterfront properties, like where you are? Appreciation is good, but rental yields are lower because of the high purchase price. But you're doing well with yours, right? How many waterfront units do you manage?" There it was, the same question, differently phrased. "I focus on a few key properties," I said carefully. "Would you ever consider taking on a partner? I have capital to invest, and you have the expertise. We could grow the portfolio together." Graham shifted uncomfortably. David, Eleanor and I keep our finances separate. We agreed on that before we married. Of course, David said smoothly. I just mean as a business opportunity, separate from your marriage. Eleanor's expertise is valuable. It would be a shame not to leverage it. After dinner, in the car driving home, Graham was quiet. I'm sorry about David, he finally said. He can be a bit pushy when it comes to money. It's fine, I said. But it wasn't fine, because I was starting to see a pattern. Over the next 6 months, the questions continued, always framed as helpful, always presented as family, looking out for family. Brandon suggested I list with him if I ever wanted to sell any properties. He could get me top dollar, family discount on commission. Michael sent me articles about tax strategies with notes like, thought you might find this useful given your portfolio. David messaged me LinkedIn articles about property investment, asking my opinion, trying to draw out details about my holdings. And the questions at family gatherings became more specific. Have you considered refinancing in this rate environment? What's your vacancy rate? Do you use property management software? What about accounting systems? How do you structure your holding companies? Have you thought about succession planning? That last one was from Michael at Christmas dinner. Graham's 3 sons and their families were all there. We just finished the main course. Succession planning? I asked. Well, yes. I mean, you've built something substantial. What happens to it when, well, eventually? He gestured vaguely, uncomfortable with naming death directly. I felt Graham tense beside me. I have a will, I said simply. But does it minimize tax burden? Does it protect the assets? Have you considered putting everything in a trust? That way, when you and Dad, well, in the future, there wouldn't be any probate issues, any fights over estate settlement. Why would there be fights? I asked quietly. Michael backtracked. I'm not saying there would be. I just mean it's good to plan these things properly. My firm handles this all the time. Complex estates, blended families. It can get messy if not structured right. Blended families. That phrase hung in the air. Because suddenly I understood. They weren't asking out of curiosity or even out of a desire to help. They were assessing, calculating, wondering what their father's new wife owned and whether any of it would eventually come to their father and through him, to them. I looked at Graham. He looked tired, sad. Eleanor's financial affairs are her own, he said firmly. I don't ask about them, and neither should any of you. Dad, we're not trying to. Enough, Graham said, with a finality I hadn't heard from him before. This is Christmas. Can we just enjoy the evening? The conversation moved on, but the damage was done. Later that night, after everyone had left, Graham and I sat in the living room. The lights from the Christmas tree reflected in the dark windows overlooking the water. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For my sons. I don't know when they became so focused on money. They're protecting their inheritance, I said gently. I understand that impulse. But you're not after my money. God, I don't even have much money. My pension, the townhouse, some savings, maybe $500,000 total. Nothing compared to. He trailed off. Compared to what? I asked. He looked at me. I'm not stupid, Eleanor. The way they ask questions, the way you deflect them, you own more than you've told me, don't you? I considered lying. But this was my husband. I'd promised to love him honestly. Yes, I said simply. How much more? All 8 units in this building, plus the commercial space on the ground floor. He stared at me. All 8? Yes. Jesus, Eleanor. That must be worth about $12 million, give or take. He stood up, walked to the window, stood there for a long moment. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to see me, not my bank account. I've always seen you. I know, but your sons don't. And if you'd known from the beginning, everything would have been different. Every decision we made, every conversation we had, it would have had this weight to it. He turned to face me. Do you think I married you for money? No. But I think if you'd known, you might have hesitated, wondered if I thought you were marrying me for money, and I couldn't bear that doubt between us. He came back to the couch, sat down heavily. So you've been protecting me from my own son's greed. I've been protecting what we have, this relationship, this peace. I didn't want money to complicate it, but it's complicated anyway now. Yes. We sat in silence for a while. Are you going to tell them? He finally asked. No. Are you? He thought about it. No, I don't think I will. Why not? Because you're right. It would change everything. They'd never look at you the same way again. They'd never look at me the same way, knowing I married someone with so much more than I have. And honestly, he looked at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. I don't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing. Let them wonder. Let them ask their invasive questions and get nothing. I felt a wave of love for this man. I drew up a new will last month, I told him. Everything is structured so that my properties stay separate from any marital assets. If something happens to me, they go to my daughter. If something happens to both of us, they're held in trust for my grandchildren. You're taken care of. You'd have the right to live in this condo for as long as you want, but ownership doesn't transfer. I don't want your money, Eleanor. I know, but I want you protected and comfortable if I die first. That's why you have lifetime residence rights here. And I also structured it so your sons can never contest it, never claim any entitlement. They wouldn't, Graham. They absolutely would. He closed his eyes. God, when did my boys become these people? They're not bad people. They're just practical. Maybe too practical. Michael's built his whole career on maximizing wealth. David's a lawyer. He sees everything as negotiable, contestable. And Brandon sells real estate. He evaluates everything by its market value. They've been shaped by their professions. That's generous of you. I'm not generous. I'm strategic. I've spent 40 years building financial security. I'm not going to let anyone, no matter how polite their questions, unravel that. Graham reached for my hand. You're brilliant, you know that? I'm careful. There's a difference. The questions from his sons continued over the following year, but they became less frequent. They could sense they were getting nowhere. I remained pleasant, vague, deflective. Graham backed me up, shutting down conversations that ventured into my financial territory. But I could see the frustration in their eyes at family gatherings, the way they'd look at the expensive wine I'd bring, the designer coat I wore, the casual mention of a trip to Italy. They were adding it up, trying to calculate what I was worth, and coming up with numbers that made them anxious. Last month, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Graham and I were hosting Thanksgiving. I'd gone upstairs to get something from my office. The door was slightly ajar, and I heard voices from the living room below. Michael and David, talking quietly. I'm telling you, she's worth way more than Dad knows, Michael was saying. I did some research. Those waterfront condos? They've appreciated 40% in the last 5 years alone. If she owns even 3 or 4 of them outright, that's serious money. So what do? David asked. We need Dad to get a post-nuptial agreement, something that clearly delineates assets, makes sure his pension and the townhouse stay separate, ensures he's protected. He'll never go for it. He's crazy about her. Then we need to plant the seed, make him understand that he's vulnerable here. She could divorce him and take half of everything. I almost laughed. Half of everything. They had it exactly backward. I don't like it, David said. Dad seems happy. Happier than he's been since Mom died. Happiness doesn't pay for elder care. If something happens and she takes everything. I'd heard enough. I went back downstairs, making noise on the steps so they'd hear me coming. They looked up, smiling, as if they hadn't just been plotting how to protect their father from his dangerous, money-hungry wife. I smiled back, served more wine, asked about their kids. That night, after everyone left, I told Graham what I'd heard. He was furious. I'm going to call them. I'm going to tell them. Don't, I said. Eleanor, they're treating you like you're some kind of gold digger, when you're the one with all the gold. Exactly. And that's why we don't tell them. Because right now, they think they're protecting you. If they knew the truth, they'd be mortified. They'd realize they've spent 2 years interrogating someone whose net worth is 20 times what they thought. They'd realize every invasive question, every suggestion that I'm after your money was insulting and absurd. Good. They should be mortified. But then they'd feel entitled to resent me for not telling them sooner, for deceiving them. And they'd shift from worrying about you to wondering if their own father is now financially dependent on his wealthy wife. They'd lose respect for you, Graham, and I won't let that happen. He sat down, deflated. So we just keep pretending? We keep living our lives. We keep our finances separate, just as we agreed. Your pension is yours, your savings are yours, your townhouse is yours, my properties are mine. We split household expenses evenly. We're roommates who happen to love each other very much. He smiled despite himself. Expensive roommates. The best kind. Now, 2 years into this marriage, I can say with absolute certainty that not telling Graham or his sons about my real estate portfolio was the smartest decision I've made. Because I've watched how people change around money, how relationships twist when assets become part of the equation, how love gets complicated when inheritance and tax planning enter the conversation. Graham and I have something pure. He brings me coffee in the morning. I cook his favorite meals. We walk along the seawall holding hands. We travel, we read, we sit in comfortable silence watching the water. He doesn't want my money. His sons absolutely do, even though they'd never admit it to themselves in those terms. And by keeping my financial life private, I've protected everyone. I've protected Graham from feeling inadequate or dependent. I've protected his sons from their own greed, from the temptation to treat me differently, to calculate and strategize and position themselves for eventual inheritance. And I've protected myself. Because I built this. Every single property, every renovation, every careful investment decision over 4 decades. I weathered recessions and tenant nightmares and roof collapses and city hall bureaucracy. I earned this security through sacrifice and work and intelligence. And I'll be damned if I'll let anyone, even family, make me feel like I have to justify it, explain it, or share it beyond my own terms. If you're entering a relationship later in life, especially a remarriage, here's what I learned. Keep your finances separate. Not because you don't trust your partner, but because money complicates everything. Have clear legal structures, a good lawyer, a solid will, proper estate planning that protects what you've built, and pay attention to red flags. When someone you barely know starts asking detailed questions about your financial situation, your assets, your estate planning, they're not asking out of concern for you. They're assessing their own potential benefit. It doesn't make them monsters. It makes them human. But you don't have to give them the information they're fishing for. Set boundaries. Be vague. Be pleasant but firm. You owe no one. Not even family, not even the adult children of your spouse, an accounting of your wealth. Your money is your business. Your security is your responsibility. And protecting what you've built isn't selfish. It's smart. I'm 63 years old. I own 8 waterfront condominiums in Vancouver worth $12 million. My husband knows now. His sons don't. And I intend to keep it that way. Some secrets aren't lies. Sometimes, privacy is just protection, and there's nothing wrong with that.